Hi guys, thank you for checking in. So today I am going to walk us through what I think is a fairly important concept, which is how to set up a long-term project, or at least how to set up a project that I will tell you right now, this is like the bare bone type of project that I set up for long-term development. Now I'm gonna put a few things out there. I am not using any specific JavaScript framework or anything like that on the client side. This is all done in vanilla JavaScript and the app is dirt simple. So I have a few videos where I talk about more advanced features such as Flux and like architectures in vanilla JavaScript and like React and all this good stuff. But today we're just focusing on putting up what I want to believe is a fairly scalable project. I'm gonna pitch some ideas. Some of them are a little bit controversial, and just hear me out. Maybe you like them, maybe you don't, and that's just fine. I love having these types of discussions, but I'm gonna challenge a few. Like if you're a senior developer, I'm gonna challenge a few of your, maybe I'm not going to say core beliefs, but I'm just going to throw some stuff out there and see if you agree with this. So that's my intro. Let's dive right in. So this is my list. I'm going to walk you through these topics and talk a little bit about the project layouts and the files and my mindset around these things. So let's get into it. The first thing that you're going to want to look at is your git ignore file. Now for the people here who haven't been using git for long or whatever, the git ignore file is in essence when you save your files in Git, some files you just don't want to add into your save, and those are generally generated files. So if I open my git ignore here, now this makes sense, this is a fairly standard one. So I don't want my project to, like whenever, and if somebody downloads my project, I don't need them to have the node modules. That's a really large folder, and they can get all that from my package JSON and like installing the packages themselves. So that makes sense. And I don't want them to get any of my CSS files because those are generated files and you can generate them. And since I'm using Webpack, I don't want them to pick up the bundle.js, which is this thing here. This is basically the name that I give that bundle. And I also don't want them to get my coverage directory, and we'll go into that in a little bit, but that's in essence where the test reports that I generate when I run my test are going to be put. So that's to start us off. So that's your git ignore file. That should be the first thing you put into your project, and you append stuff to that, as you go along, because you'll find that some files like are added and you don't want them to be in the version control. Cool. Now let's talk about build tools. So to get a good understanding of how I set up my build systems or my build tools, let's look at my package JSON. Now first, let's just look at the dependencies. So EGS, ESLint, Express, Jest, Lodash, Node Sass, Stylint, and Webpack. And I have some Jest configurations down here, and you can see here, these are thresholds for my testing. As you can see here, I'm fairly aggressive with my coverage, like I'm a perfectionist, I'm gonna admit. But this is more for demo purposes. I mean, if you have good for you if you can keep 100% test coverage. Shit, I might need to learn some stuff from you because I can't. Anyway, so this is where the build tools are, or the build scripts. So I have these, this is a fairly standard layout for me. So one of the first things I like to run is I create a make, which is, it basically bootstraps up stuff that I think is important. And since I'm a really sloppy coder and like I'm really bad at remembering to always run my test-driven development cycles and make sure that I'm doing all the right things, I usually create a little commit hook that checks, like that runs a lot of stuff and checks that the work that I'm gonna commit before I run my commit. So that's usually what I put in my make script. But you can put all kinds of stuff in here, and some people do it differently. And let's take a look at my testing. So I have a test script so that I can run all my tests. I have a coverage script which is going to be used to check that, okay, do I have the required coverage when I run my test. And as you can see, I use the bail flag here, so that if there's any error or anything like that, it just quits immediately, because when I run this I don't really care so much about, oh, did all the tests pass. I just want to see, is everything is it up to scratch? Do I have enough coverage? And then I have my watcher, so when I do test-driven development, it keeps the watch mode on running, which is really nice. I love that about Jest, by the by. I actually switched from Mocha over to Jest very recently, and this is one of the main reasons. It's very convenient. And then I have this one. This is test start, which is a little script that I have. We'll dive into that deeper, but in essence what it does is that it checks that my server can start, and that's all it does. It's a trivial thing, but I find that I often forget that. I might forget like a letter somewhere in an import or something, and then it breaks and I commit that. This is a really nice little quick check. It's not very costly, and just make sure that, yeah, the server started. Great. And then I have my start script, of course, which starts the server, and then I have my builders. So build CSS, all it does is that it pipes my main.css SCSS file and creates my main CSS file where all my CSS lives. And then I have, this is a fairly long one, which could be much nicer. It does the exact same thing for a file that I call above fold, and it creates the above fold CSS file. I'll talk a little bit more about that, just a minute. And then I have my build for Javascript, which is done through Webpack. And if you're wondering what this npx thing here is, it's just a convenience thing that's been added fairly recently in the later versions of Node, and it just saves me the hassle of trying to reference the bin folder, and it's just a convenience thing. You can look that up. And then I have my build, which just runs the previous two build subgroups here. Serve, what that does is that it runs the build. Oh, I could have actually made this a single script just on build. Oh well, all it does is that it builds my assets and then starts the server. And then I have my lint function, or lint script, which basically runs the linters, both of them. And then I have lint.js, which runs my ESLint, and we'll talk to you about that just in just a moment. And then I have style.int, of course, to check that my CSS is nice and tidy. So this is my basic setup. For the most part, this is like, I did have different flavors of this, but this is like usually how I start a long-term project. And when I say a long-term project, I'm saying I'm not just hacking something together. This is something that I'm going to contribute to, and maybe I'll have some partners or colleagues or something like that. So this is my base setup. Okay, all this other stuff here we kind of covered. Now let's go to the next thing in the README. So let's talk about linters. So linters are so important in JavaScript. I cannot stress this enough. They are so important. So let's go through my linting setup. Now this is just for demo purposes. So I use ESLint. So what you should do immediately, if you have no preferences, go and look up good ESLinting setups and things that work for you. I usually have a really minimal setup to begin with, because most of the stuff that's by default in ESLint is it's just get something that works. I don't really care which one what configuration you use. Just use something, because it will save you a lot of hassle. As you can see, this is just a really basic setup. Don't even think I've added any really specific stuff. I just want you to kind of understand that this is an important topic, and it's an entire topic in of itself. I will even tell you that when working professionally with this stuff, I've often been in a situation where we've actually created our own custom lint rules for things that we need to enforce, and there's so many awesome libraries that you can check out for good linting rules. So just bear with me and really take this to heart. Spend some time learning about ESLint, linters, custom plugins, and stuff like that, because it will make all of your code better. It's like having a colleague sitting with you, pair coding, and helping you and making you remember things that you should be doing and things you shouldn't be doing. And you can do a lot more fancy stuff than the basic stuff that, make sure that you're using single quotes versus double quotes. So yeah, hyping linting as much as I just humanly can, because trust me, I actually had I've had this conversation 100 times with my colleagues. I'm saying to them, they keep telling me, oh, you need to do this or that, and you should remember that when you're writing code. And I said, make a lint rule. Just make it for because you can tell me 100 times if I'm not naturally thinking about it, and if I have to struggle to remember to do things the way that you want me to do them, make a lint rule. Because if you make a lint rule, then you will be assured that my development environment will tell me when I'm doing something wrong, and it will make sure that you're getting what you want. That's all I'm going to say about it. Alright, and then we have an ESLint ignore file. So this is usually for like, yeah, as you can see, it's the coverage and the bundles because they're generated files, and I don't like we don't have any like real control over those. And finally, let's look at the styleint RC file. Now this is a once again very basic setup. I don't really care, like don't sweat so much what's exactly in this file. It's not about what this file is like what the information here is. It's more a fact that you're using like something like styleint, because this is it's going to save you a lot of hassle as well. And I even argue that if you like, this is a little bit more advanced, and I'm not going to get too deep into it, but you can do some like really cool rules and like make some really high level decisions, saying that stuff like, oh, you shouldn't be using like pixels because you should always reference a variable, and like all that stuff. But that's really advanced stuff, and out of scope for this little tutorial of mine, or video, or whatever you want to call it. And finally, I want you to tip you off about, let's see, where is it? Yes, prettier. Now this is a JavaScript formatter. Like as you can see, I have a styleint plugin as well. So a lot of these linters have plugins for your whatever text editor or environment you're using, but I highly recommend prettier. This is the best thing to happen to my work environment, working flow since, I don't know, probably Emmet or like snippets. It's really powerful. It formats your code and takes care of a lot of that stuff, which is great. Alright, cool. Let's look at public assets. So here you can see my folder structure. I usually have a source or an app or a folder or whatever that holds all my code. And just to touch very briefly on the server as well. So this is my server. It requires the app, and then it listens on port 3000, logs it out, yada yada yada. Then we have the app. As you can see here, this is dirt simple stuff. So you have an express file or an express import, a controller called root because that's all I use, path, instantiate the app, serve static, files from the public directory, set up the view, and the view engine is EGS because I like to keep it simple for my tutorials. And then we have a two endpoints, an index endpoint which is going to render a page, and an API endpoint that's just going to serve up some JSON. That's it. Dirt simple stuff. Now if I open the public folder here, you can see that here I have my above fold CSS file, some common SCSS, and a main SCSS. But notice something here. This is just a pointer file that imports a lot of stuff. This is the one that I'm compiling to my CSS file, and as you can see here, I get some styles, some very few, because you know we keep things simple. Now there is nothing else in here. If you may notice, there is actually like if we like there's nothing here as well. Oh, there's one rule here, right? But you see that we have this to-dos and to-dos underscore li thing. They are not here, and we're going to talk about that in just a little while. And then we have my JS file, which holds a main and a bundle. So the bundle, this is the Webpack bundle that's being created. And the main.js file, this is also a pointer file. All it does is it requires this thing here. So it goes to views, components, to-do list, and imports the to-do list file. Once again, we'll talk about that in just a moment, because I just wanted to touch on the public stuff and also talk about like you have a common directory for common functionality. Utils, we'll talk about that a little bit later. I'll actually add it into it here because I think that this is a fairly important thing. Let's add that in there. So anywho, look at the controller here. So here we have a simple endpoint called index, and we do some export, and then I have the other endpoint for listing to-dos. And this is dirt simple. That's just an array with a foo bar and a bass. And if we now go to the terminal, run npm start, running on port 3000, and this is my fancy web page. And as you can see here, it's just a UL with a script tag. That's it. That's all there is to it. So now you think you have a fairly good understanding of like all the public stuff, the assets, and like what the whole thing is about. Now let's talk about the server-side rendering. So I have a views directory, and usually I have a directory called a layout and one called components, and also a index file. So what we're doing here is basically that I'm importing a header file, which includes like all the head information, because I like to separate that out, and because as you might find yourself adding more and more complexity to your headers, and sometimes you might have some tags and sometimes you may not have some tags. I like to have that fairly liquid so I can switch it out when I need to. So this is usually how I start. And now we come to the body of the whole thing. So there's two things here. I'm importing a to-do list component, or a partial if you will, and then I have a footer component or a footer partial, whatever floats your boat. And the reason why I'm importing it like this is because I want to keep things separated. Like this idea of having components at the visual level is very important. But as you can see, I also have something called the footer is a layout, and the semantic difference here is that these are things that are fairly static. They don't have so much to do with the content of the page. They have more to do with like what's going to be on the page, what JavaScript is going to be on the page, what meta information is going to be, the CSS, that type of stuff. It's stuff that the user doesn't see in essence, and you usually have them in the head or the footer. So here's my head file, a title, and then I do some inline styling. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. So you can see that I am inlining some of the stuff that I have here, and then I'm also doing an import for my main CSS file, right? And on the footer level, all I'm doing is importing this bundle.js. That's it. Dirt simple stuff, right? Cool, so that's the server-side rendering. Now, let's go and challenge some basic ideas. So here we have my components directory, and for the guys who've been doing React for some time, you're gonna go, aha, I've seen this before. This is how you do it in React. And yes, this is a concept that I've seen in React, but I want to go and say that C and C++, they were doing this a long time ago, and we are calling them components today, but I like to think of these things as libraries. And the reason why I like that idea is because it's the way that Node modules works. It's the same principle. Like it used to be that if I imported like Babel or whatever, every single thing that had to do with Babel, all its dependency, everything about it was in that single directory. Now they flatten it nowadays to solve some other problems, but the core idea was that everything you needed about Babel was in the Babel directory. That's it. And I think there's a lot of power in that concept. I think it's a really good idea to, instead of thinking in the MVC way of thinking, like I want to argue that MVC is a conceptual level thing. It's a coding, like it's a mindset of how you structure your code. But I think a lot of coders these days, they all put them at the directory level, and I think that's wrong. I don't think that you should always have that. It always makes sense to have a model directory and a view directory and a controller directory, and then you have a test directory, and then you have all this. Because I pose this question: what is the value in that separation? How is that helping you be more efficient? Because I will argue that if I'm writing code for this component, which is called a to-do list, which is this thing here, if I'm making this component, why do I want to put my test in one directory, and then I want to put my view or my HTML in another directory, and then the JavaScript is going to go with it in another directory, and then my CSS in another directory? Why not just put them in the same directory? There's no downside to it, in my opinion. And some people will say, well, if you're bundling and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, sure, we can, sure, you don't want to, like, if you're building like Java applications and you have archives and stuff, but put that on Maven. Like put it in the exclude it from your build pipeline. Why just do that instead? Yeah, recursively go through and exclude everything that has a certain name structure to it, like this test, for example. So let's open my partial here. So this is the pattern that I'm using. It's just a list. It has a class of to-dos, and then it has this custom element here. We're going to talk about that in just a moment, just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Yeah, we're actually here. Okay, cool. So you see an iterator. It's going to iterate through the array called lists, and it's going to create some elements, to-dos underscore underscore list. And if you're wondering about this, this is BEM, block element modifier. Check that out, learn it by heart. If you ever thought that CSS was difficult or tricky to get right, this is the thing that's going to make you a superstar with CSS. Trust me, just trust me. And let's talk about data.js. Now, this is a practice that this is close to my heart. So one of the biggest fundamental flaws I see people do is something like this, JS foo, or to-dos. Now, it used to be, before custom elements, that in order to have, you put some JavaScript on your page, right, and it's going to do something fancy with your list. In our case, this is going to be these files down here, like to-do list. We're going to talk about them in just a moment. But this was the pattern, right? You created a class or an ID or a selector. You used CSS semantics to hook JavaScript onto an element on the page. And I argue that just stop doing that. Use custom elements instead, custom attributes like this instead, because this is safe. This, JS to-dos. This has semantic meaning. This has meaning to something else. Like, just for the sake of argument's sake, that you're sloppy with your class naming or whatever, and somebody somewhere thought, hey, I'm gonna make a class, a CSS class that actually is named this thing here, and then I need to change the specifications, or maybe I don't want to call it JS to-dos or whatever, and I remove this thing or make it into foo instead. All of a sudden, the styling broke. That class that was referencing the JS to-dos earlier, that now broke. So this is, I will admit, not the most common case to happen, but I will make the argument that if you remove this and start using something like data.js, you can very easily search through your project and find this here. And this is just a safer way of doing the same thing. So please adopt this practice. And if you're already doing it, more power to you guys. That's great, because to me there is no logical reason why you shouldn't be doing something like this. Use custom attributes, they're there to help you. Alright, so let's take a look at my JavaScript. So here we see that I am just willy-nilly declaring some variables. Why am I doing this? Why am I not doing something like this? Like, if I can type function, this. For the old school guys here, you'd see that this is a module pattern, a self-invoking function. Why am I not doing this? Well, the answer is very simple. I'm using Webpack. So because I'm using Webpack actually does that for me. And as you can see, my Webpack setup is really simple. You have a context, which is that main file we were looking at earlier. Let's see here. Remember? We're actually importing. That's why I'm not declaring this in any way. This require, what it's going to do, it's going to take this entire file, put it in a context or a module which is safe from global scope, and dump it right onto that file, and I'll put a bundle file over here. Now you can do this in a nicer way. You can do much fancier stuff. I just wanted to keep it simple to sell the idea of this instead. So now we have a module system which really moves like the vast majority of all the problems you have with JavaScript. Now all of a sudden you can actually import stuff safely. So why did we need React again? Oh, because it does all this other cool fancy stuff. I'm not bash talking React. I love that framework. I love everything. I love Facebook for making it. It's just a great framework. But I'm trying to, with this video, sell the idea that, you know, sometimes you can actually do pretty cool stuff without question whether or not you need these really big frameworks. Like ask yourself if you're making a little blog or something, just a page that is really static, that doesn't do any really fancy stuff or like dynamic routing or anything like that, do you really need React? Like really? Because this is what I hope to show with this little project of mine, that partly that this is the way I think that you could structure your project to make it like last a long time and be very maintainable, and partly that you can actually use the mindset that React brought to our community and do some really cool stuff without always using it. Anywho, so as you can see here, this selector here, this is really great because I have this thing I can hook into, and I'm completely sure that it will always, like, this has no semantic meaning anywhere else. It's not an ID, it doesn't, like, there's no interdependencies going on here. This is just for me. This is just for me. That's so great. And then I have this little function that's taking a document, the document object, and returns a list, and then I append my list item to this list here, and that's where you're getting this last element here. Super simple stuff. Okay, so let's move on and look at the utilities. Now this is a dirt simple function. As you can see, once again, what I'm trying to illustrate here is that this is my entry point to this component. This is all the code that's actually bootstrapping and like doing all that impure stuff that's so scary to test, right? That it's getting an element, and then all it's doing is that it has a function that takes in a document, and I'll talk about that very briefly, why it's doing this. And then it appends stuff. So this is like in React, this would be your index file or your component. This is the code that is going to do the mutations and the stuff, interact with the DOM. And then I have a separate file where I actually do the business logic. And as you can see now, document is being taken in, and then I use create element on the document, create a list item, and I do the styling and put the text, and then I return the list element. Now, some of you are going to tell me that, hey, Frederick, you're about functional programming, right? This isn't functional programming. And I say, yeah, it actually is. Had I done this, you would be right. It would not be functional programming. But this, in my opinion, is. Because I don't know what document is. What if it's my own thing? Yeah, it has a semantic meaning, but I'm passing it in here, which means that this is just an object. And it has, and I assume in this code, it's not great code. I mean, this could break if you pass something bad inside, but I'm not trying to make perfect code. I'm trying to make pure code. So document.createElement, that's all I'm assuming here, and that's going to create an object. This is not, like, this is, to me, very testable, and we'll see why it's very testable in just a moment. And then I finally have my missing styles. Here, you saw those earlier. This is where these guys live. So this is, like, you can even, what's pretty cool about, like, I'm doing explicit imports now because I think explicit imports are important, like doing actual requires and CSS. But I've been in projects where I created an iterator. I actually wrote a little script that like walks all of my folders and checks, hey, do you have some styles for me, or JavaScript or whatever, and just dynamically imports them. And that's a convenience that you can do as well. I recommend it if that's your style. So finally, let's look at some tests. Okay, and we use Jest, of course, because that's all the rage nowadays, and I actually quite like it. Anywho, this it starts by doing this silly little test which just checks that, hey, I did an import, are you sure that that returns something? Yep, to be true. This is just a sanity check, very low level, like low value test. Alright, so first test, so creates an li, and here is where the magic happens. So remember that to do this, make this function work, we actually have to pass it the document. And that's what we're doing. So I'm stubbing and mocking this away. Had I not done this, if I had directly referenced document.createElement from within the function, I would break the functional paradigm, which I think is really bad, because this now, even though it's a little bit of a mocking going on, this is testable because I can now control everything. I control the input, and since everything's being passed, my test is very simple. It's very easy for me to run. So as you can see, all it does is mock document.createElement, and it's expecting that it's going to be called with an li. Simple little test. And here comes the next thing. returns an li with the correct class and content. So this time I'm just returning an object, because what's going to happen inside is that, yeah, this function here is going to, I expect it internally to return an object, or in this case a node, and then I'm going to populate the properties on that node and return the node. So I expect class name to have to use li, and this is the text content I'm expecting. So this is a fairly basic test. Now the power of this is that, once again, everything is in the same directory. So if this components, we deprecate this, that project doesn't need it anymore, I remove it and everything goes with it. That's beautiful to me, because now I clean up after myself, which I've seen so many projects where you have all these files that keep on they nobody, like, I've even gone so far, I've actually written a tool called dead code that tries to figure out what you're actually using, and if you have files that you're no longer requiring, and usually it finds quite a lot of stuff that's not being used in a project, right? Anywho, those are some of my tips. Let's take a look at above fold. So above fold, now all the rage is performance, right? That's what everybody's talking about these days. Oh, performance, performance, performance. I think we're all getting a little bit performance crazy. Yeah, you know, even in the browser. And anywho, the thing that I wanted to show you here is that the above fold concept of the critical rendering path is the idea that you should inline some styling at the stuff that the user is going to see on first, so that you can as quickly as possible show something meaningful to the user. Now you still, like, if let's just, now we have a very simple page, so this is not gonna be like a really concrete example of how to do this, but just try to follow me along at the conceptual level. So here would be, this would be all of my styling, that this is all the CSS this entire website uses or page. You can do several things, but that's what the idea is. And then I have my above fold imports file that's being outputted, and this is the place where I import the styling of all the components that I know that the user is going to be able to see first, like the stuff that's going to be at the top of the web of the page. Now this is fairly static, so you usually just, you know, you create your first layout and your styling and stuff, and then you just do these import once. And whenever I run my build pipeline, this is being updated. So so the magic is like this file here, that, you know, the user can still get this, but the idea here is to inline this, right? So I create this extra file, and here comes this thing that you can do it in another way. You might have noticed that earlier. So what I do when I boot up my server is that I read that file. I actually go to abovefold.css and read it into memory. Now remember, this isn't really that large of a file. The idea here is that this is just containing the styling that you need for the above fold stuff. So memory wise, I don't care so much if it's living in memory. It's not that big. And then I put this here. I add it to my render, and we saw earlier that that's what is happening here. So I have a style tag, and I actually render this stuff in here. So if we now open this head thing here, we can see that, hey, here's our inline styles. And I think this is, I mean, this isn't very costly. It's actually, it's fairly easy to maintain. You can make it much nicer than this, of course, but just, you know, this is something, I think it's a fairly good idea. It's just something I'm throwing out there as a bonus for you watching my boring little video. Right, so let's talk about utilities. Now, one of the things that I think that you should start favoring, especially if you're doing node-based development, is function libraries as opposed to classes and object-oriented stuff. Now, what I mean by that is that if this is what I do. I create utilities or modules, and they're all just pure functions that I'm exporting, and this becomes really easy to test. To me, it becomes very simple. Don't mind so much about this little function here. It's gonna make sense in a little while, and this isn't the best syntax, but like hopefully it will illustrate my point. So this is just a pure function. All it does is that it takes an error object and it uses the get function and plucks or gets the message property and returns that. If it doesn't find it, it's gonna return this standardized error. Now this function here Git. It is God's gift, the gods of code. This is like what Linus Torvalds he probably had a dream and it projected out to some group of coders somewhere and they made this function. For the love of God, make this function a part of the JavaScript standard because it's so valuable. This is hands down my favorite function. So in essence what it does is that it takes as the first parameter an object structure, an array or something, and then it allows me to do things like this. It allows me to express like an index chain of things in a safe manner. If this index, like if error.message.message first item in an array doesn't exist, it's gonna fail safely and return this string over here. Now that is really powerful. It's really, really powerful. I would even say that I would love this to be a part of the syntax. It could be something like const foo equal to object obj question mark. This is barred. I'm stealing this from Swift. Yes, I don't care. I'm stealing it. Foo bar something like that, and then you can do an or foo whatever. I don't know. This would be. This is what I want. Like you put this in the fucking standard because most of the bugs that I deal with, and I hope that you guys can relate, is indexing to like deep damn indexing chains. Like I've seen people who've had like an index of like they're indexing 5 objects into something, and all it takes is for one of those objects in that chain to be gone, and bam, you have a thrown exception and you have a null reference. That is, or undefined. So that's why get to me is such a powerful tool. It allows me to safely index into things. It makes my code more robust, and I really like that. Anyway, next thing I want to touch on is naming conventions, and I'm stealing this idea from functional programming. It's just a thing I've kind of gotten used to. So what I like is that you know that function we have in the browser, A to B and B to A. I like to do that actually for when I have a functional approach for my functions as well. So I do error to error message. So I'm trying to express here that, alright, this function takes an error and it converts that to an error message. It's just a small thing I like to do. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but you'll see me do this fairly often. Now let's look at my tests, and as you can see here, like it's just a basics test. You import the utilities, you do your sanity check, error to error message, you create an error, put it in the function, and then you expect that string to be my error. Same thing here, you try to call the function with nothing, and then you get a default value back. So that's why get makes this work so nice, because this is undefined right now, and it's trying to get message out of, from undefined, and instead it gives me that default value. Love it, love everything about it. Get is the best. Now let's look at commit hooks. So I was telling you earlier about how horribly bad I am at remembering to run my tests. I mean, when I run like jest or something and I keep continuously, like when I do my test-driven development, I usually do that as in a phase. Like I usually start out like I bootstrap a lot of stuff and like I build a bunch of stuff, and then I start thinking, oh yeah, I have this functionality, because like I want to just play around with stuff before I write the test. And everybody tells me that, oh, that's the wrong way to go about it, and I say, yeah, if I naturally feel that, yeah, I'm gonna make a function, I will write the test for the function first. But that's not always the case, because it's not natural for me to think that way, and I don't care how many people tell me that that's the way to do it. I understand why it's so valuable to write the test first, and I'm trying my best to be better at that, but I'm just not there yet. So what I do, and it's not an excuse not to do it, it's more like this is something I think is a good idea, is that I create my commit hooks. So you saw my little make script here earlier that is going to copy precommit.shell over and create a pre-commit hook in my Git folder. What that means that whenever I try to commit my stuff, this script is going to run, and this is my basic setup. So I have a shell script, a bash script, and then I do set-e, which means that if anything breaks in this script, it's going to exit out, which means that if any of these things fail, it's going to stop my script from running. And we'll see that now. So if I stop the server and I do git commit, you see that it didn't go to my commit screen. It starts running my scripts. And I'll walk you, yeah, and then it fails, which is great. And it fails on the coverage, which is why I'll talk to you very briefly about that as well. So you can see the script that it ran. So it starts by linting all my files, making sure that I don't have any like typos or like I'm doing something that's not with the project standards. And the same thing goes for ESLint. It checks for errors, that type of stuff. Stylint, yeah, does the same thing for CSS, and then it does this npx just dash coverage and bail, and that's what's running here. So it runs all my tests, making sure that they're all passing. It will fail if I don't pass my tests, and then it gives me this nice coverage report. And as you can see here, wow, I forgot something. This thing here, it has an issue with my coverage, which it should have, because I have this little thing over here, this extra function that I added. Sneaky little me. Do this, and I'll run it again. Here we go. Let's cross our fingers that everything works. Come on. Yes, yes. Come on. Yes. Yeah! Oh, success! And now I can commit my code, because I firmly believe that you never want to commit. Never create a commit that doesn't work, because you don't know if unless you're squashing and stuff and you're like very good at that. Yeah, then do it. So let's walk through what's happening here and my steps and the way that I think about this. Hopefully it makes sense to you guys. So it starts by linting everything. That's number one. That's my first line of defense. Then it checks my coverage, making sure that I have coverage and my tests are running, all that good stuff. Then it builds. It goes and tries to build my assets, making sure that everything's wired up correctly, so that I actually, if I'm committing this, no one's going to get an error when they try to build. And then finally it does my test start, which is running this script here. Now, this is all this does. Logs out trying to start the app, and it does the exact same thing as the server. The only difference is that it's doing a set timeout of about 500 milliseconds or something, and then it closes the server. And the reason why it does this is just I want to start the server. I just want it to run. And you might think that I'm a little bit weird, but think about this. So this file here, now I don't know what type of testing paradigms you guys come from, but I don't think I've ever tested the entry point to my little Express app here. So if I do this, none of my tests are going to fail. None of them. I'll prove it. I just made an incorrect import. That's it. It's a single letters error, and we're not in typed language, right? All my tests passed. No problems. But bam! You see? And it's such an easy thing to do. You can take, if you like it, do it. If you don't like it, just forget I said anything. I like to do that. Anything I can do to make my code more robust and like make sure that I never commit something that's breakable. I like, my motto is, and I'm blatantly stealing this from a guy who's had a tech talk. I can't remember his name now, but it was absolutely amazing. He said that your master branch should be like a fortress that can defend itself from bad code, and I took that entire thing to heart. I absolutely agree. Make sure you set up your project so that you fall into the pit of success. Okay, finally git tags. That's the last part I argue you need to know about to put up a really nice and robust project. So you can see here we have some tags, 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, 1.2.1. And for those who are new to Semver or like semantic versioning, the idea is that like if you have a major increase, like the first number, if that's ever increased, you're communicating to the consumers of your application that you made breaking changes. You make something, this is a big change. This is going to change the way that this application behaves. And then you have like the minor, I don't know, minor version basically, which indicates that hey, something was added, but it should not break anything in the current application. It's just added value, new stuff, right? And then you have the patch versions, which is the last number, which means that yeah, I just fixed a bug or something, nothing changed, but I just fixed something. And I will tell you right now that you should check out like Git flow, and like you have story branches and feature branches and all these paradigms for different styles of branching when you're working on a project. And I will tell you that my rule of thumb is that whenever, and I mean whenever you commit something to the master branch, you put a number, you bump this number every single time. I have even been on project where I've been so passionate about that I've created Git hooks that automatically creates tags for me. It automatically bumps my version number in my package JSON and stuff like that, because trust me, it is better to have too many tags than not enough, because you can like if you lose your code or like you need to go back to something, this is your snapshots, so this is really important. Okay, guys, I hope this has been educational for you. I hope I made some sense and maybe got you thinking about this stuff, because like I'm not an architect, but trust me, a well-structured project with some good practices will go a long way to make sure that you don't get into that horrible project that just never wants to die, and it's just full of legacy, and you just don't enjoy what you do anymore. So these are some of my ideas. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching.